I'm screenwriter Christopher Riley, author of the Script Formatting Guide to Hollywood Standard, which is now in its 16th year, as a reference for my fellow writers around the world, and on its way to a third edition that we'll publish next spring. We're living right now through a moment in history that will change us. In the future, we'll look back on this moment and we'll talk about the time before the pandemic and the time after and how the world changed in this moment. We'll also look back, I believe, on the time before the killing of George Floyd and the time after. And I pray we'll be able to see that the world has changed to become more just. So we're actually living through two moments that may define us for a long time to come. It's this kind of defining moment I want to talk to you about. To do that, I have to start with the lessons of Coleman Luck. After Coleman Luck served as a combat infantry officer in Vietnam, he came to Hollywood and became a writer and producer of television shows like The Equalizer. He also served as a mentor to me and my wife, Kathy, as we wrote the screenplay that became the German film After the Truth. Coleman believed that all of us are the products of a handful of what he called character-defining moments. 5 or 6 moments that shaped us, that left a permanent mark for better or for worse. And to really know a person, you needed to know at least some of those moments that defined them. And for those of us who develop characters for film and television and books and all sorts of stories, if we really wanted to know our characters, we needed to know their defining moments. My wife and frequent screenwriting partner, Kathy, embraced this idea and pushed it further. She said that for us as storytellers, before we can tell our character stories, we need to understand our own. Kathy likes to quote the writer Frederick Buechner, who advises us that, quote, we must address ourselves to the fullness of who we are and to the emptiness too. The emptiness where grace and peace belong, but mostly are not. Because terrible and wonderful things have happened to us all. To understand our own stories and to give ourselves any hope of telling someone else's story, we need to discover the terrible and wonderful things that have happened to us, the moments that have shaped us for better and for worse. What do these moments look like? If you've seen the Pixar film Finding Nemo, you remember that wrenching opening scene where a clownfish named Marlin sees his wife Coral and their hundreds of unhatched eggs devoured by a barracuda, leaving a traumatized, bereaved Marlin with a single surviving egg. He names the tiny fish that emerges from that egg Nemo, and he promises he will never let anything happen to Nemo. That tragic moment of loss and the promise he makes in that moment defines Marlin's character for the rest of the story. It also infuses the rest of the movie with a sense of emotional depth. It helps us feel why the story matters. It keeps us from looking away. If you don't watch Pixar films, you may have watched The Godfather. It's another father and son story. In this one, the father, Vito, a mafia boss, has been gunned down in the streets and is clinging to life. His son, Michael, has to make a choice. What will he do about this crime that's been committed against his father? Michael's a young war hero, a soldier just back from World War II. He's the good son, the clean one untouched by the family business, the one who might someday be a senator or even a president. If you've seen the movie, you've seen the restaurant scene, the one where Michael stands up from dinner with the men responsible for the hit on his father. You remember watching Michael walk back to the bathroom and find the gun that's been planted there for him, then walk through multiple sets of doors back to the table where he uses the gun to kill those men. in that moment, a moment of action that results from a choice Michael has made, Michael is forever changed. He transforms from war hero to crime boss. It's a character-defining moment and the pivot point of the entire story. And if you met Michael and didn't know about that moment, you couldn't be said in any full or satisfying way to know him. What are the characteristics of character-defining moments? How do we recognize them when we find them in our own life histories? And what do they look like in the lives of our characters? Here's a list that's by no means exhaustive. In a character-defining moment, number 1, a deep and lasting emotional change occurs. In Finding Nemo, Marlin goes from carefree, playful, and filled with hope to burdened, anxious, and filled with grief. Number 2, a life-changing decision is made. In The Godfather, Michael decides to turn away from a law-abiding life of service to his country toward vengeance and outlaw violence. That turn forces Michael to leave his wife, to flee to Italy, and it sets him on a different course for the rest of the film and the films that follow. The third characteristic that may be present in a character-defining moment is a moral or spiritual change occurs. More than Michael's circumstances change as a result of his choice. His inner life changes in a way that reverberates through his family in ugliness, shattered relationships, and death after violent death. Fourth characteristic that can be present in defining moments. There's a death or a birth. Now this can be literal or it can be figurative. In Finding Nemo, Marlin's character was defined by the death of Coral and all but one of their children. My own character was defined during my college years when I saw a movie called Ordinary People that moved me and changed me into a more caring person and showed me how film can connect with our hearts. In that moment, I experienced a birth. It was the birth of my dream to move to Hollywood and tell stories for the screen that might connect with people the way the film Ordinary People connected with me. The fifth characteristic that can be present in character-defining moments is that the moment creates a moment of before and after. This may be the most universal test of defining moments. We talk about the time before the divorce and after the divorce, the time before the fire and the time after, the time before she won the lottery and the time after. For my family, it's the time before and after the diagnosis. Also for me, it's the time before and after I was told a crippling lie as a young boy and believed it. It's also the time before and after I discovered as an adult that what I'd believed was a lie and didn't need to have power over me anymore. This language of before and after attaches to virtually every moment that really defines us and our characters. The sixth characteristic that can be present in defining moments. They can be moments that damage or cripple, or on the other hand, moments that repair or heal. When I develop a character, I think about how they need to grow and change over the course of the story. How are they damaged? What do they lack? Then I have to dig further back to discover how they got to be this way. When did they suffer this damage? Was it a self-inflicted wound, or did someone or something else savage them? And then, is there a moment in the course of the story where they grow, where the wound heals, where the gaping hole gets filled up? How does that happen? And how can I write in any credible way about such a moment if I've never observed and examined moments like that in my own life? These are some of the characteristics of the moments that define us and that define our characters. When you start looking, you might discover more. If you're a storyteller, you can put this idea of character-defining moments to work as soon as today. Start with your main character and search for that handful of moments that defines her. Does she have a dream? Well, when was it born? Has she discovered some strength or weakness in herself? What did that moment of discovery look like? Is something in her broken? When and how did it get that way? What's the central relationship in her life? When is that relationship born? And when does it become the most important human connection she has? Has she experienced the death of a dream, or a parent, or a child, or her innocence in a way that reshapes her to this day? At some point in her story, does she experience a moment of growth or healing? How does that moment unfold? And how is it made credible? How does it ring true because it's informed by an experience of growth or healing in your own life story? Questions like these will lead you to 5 or 6 character-defining moments for each of your main characters. Once you find the moment, describe it in a short, dramatic paragraph, like a scene that tells the story of that moment of change. Not all of these moments you discover will show up in the script. They don't need to, because they will inform your understanding of your character and lead you to write richer dialogue, more complicated conflicts, and deeper connections and more poignant disconnections, to borrow language from author Claudia Johnson. By doing this character work, you'll add depth and humanity and emotional resonance to your stories. You'll offer insight to your audience. You will give us the chance to recognize ourselves in your characters and experience the thing that first brought me to film, which was the satisfying, therapeutic, salvific instant of recognizing myself and my losses and my sporadic triumphs in a character and saying, oh, you too. Rarely do we recognize a defining moment when we're in the middle of it. But here we are in a moment so big and so dramatic we can't miss it. This extended moment of life and death, of hope and anxiety and separation and struggle and loss and daily heroism and shrinking cowardice and generosity, this moment in which we mask ourselves to protect strangers, this moment that unmasks terrible and long-standing inequities, this moment of pandemic is a defining moment for each one of us. Like our characters, we grow through struggle. We also grow, as Robert McKee has pointed out, as a result of choices we make under pressure. In this defining moment in which the whole world struggles together, each of us gets to choose how we'll change. Will we choose love over fear? Will I choose self-interest over generosity? Will you choose hope over despair? Those choices shape who we become, and they reveal who we are. And the merciful thing is, if we don't like what's revealed about us by the choices we make, sometimes we get to remake those choices. We get to choose again. And if we do that, if we pivot and change direction, we experience yet another character-defining moment. And sometimes, when I find I can't remake myself, help comes from someone outside myself, from beyond myself, and that we call grace. I pray that this moment will be that kind of moment for the world, for our nations, and for each one of us. May you be an agent of peace and justice, of grace and mercy. And may you and the stories you tell spread health.